Allison thought she had everything: love, stability, a perfect life. But when she discovers her husband Daniel's betrayal, her world is shattered. As she uncovers the truth, the lines between forgiveness and revenge blur, and Allison faces a heartbreaking choice: hold on to the man she loved, or let go, to reclaim her life. Can she heal from the scars of infidelity, or will the past consume her? Join Allison on an emotional journey of self-discovery, heartbreak, and empowerment as she navigates the painful path of betrayal. What will she choose? And will she ever truly move on? It's funny how things can look perfect from the outside. A beautiful home, a loving partner, a life that seems, well, exactly like how you thought it would turn out. This was the world that Allison Porter had built for herself, or at least, that's how it appeared. The kind of world where everything feels safe, predictable, or at least, it did, until it didn't. Allison was in her early 30s, with chestnut brown hair that she always kept neatly tied back, her eyes sharp but warm. She had the kind of smile that could light up a room, but lately, it was a little harder to find. A week ago, she would have sworn she had everything figured out. She had a successful career as a marketing consultant, a beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, and a husband, Daniel, who was the epitome of good guy. Kind, supportive, dependable, traits that made her feel lucky, secure. But luck, she was starting to learn, had a funny way of running out. Daniel Porter was in his mid-30s, tall and athletic with an easygoing charm. He had always been the kind of guy you could rely on, whether it was fixing a leaky faucet or cheering her on at work. Everyone loved him, and Allison loved him too. Or at least, she thought she did. But there was this unease she couldn't shake off lately, like something was off, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. She tried to ignore it at first, chalking it up to the usual stress, work piling up, the pressure of keeping up with life. But it kept eating at her, this nagging feeling that something was changing. Daniel had been coming home later and later, sometimes staying out until after midnight. His phone, once casually left on the kitchen counter, was now always with him, like it was a lifeline he couldn't afford to let go of. And it wasn't just his schedule. It was the little things, the way he'd smile at her. But there was something distant in his eyes now. The way he'd touch her arm, but there was no real affection behind it, just routine. She'd tried to talk to him about it, asking if everything was okay, but the conversation always ended the same way: he'd smile, brush it off, tell her he was just stressed at work. But Allison knew stress didn't make someone so absent. Something wasn't right. Allison had always been someone who prided herself on being open, trusting, and supportive, but her instincts were beginning to scream at her. She didn't want to believe it, but every time Daniel's phone buzzed, or he stepped out for a call, it felt like there was something hidden in those moments, something she wasn't part of. And that's when she found it. It was one of those rare quiet nights when the house was still, and Daniel had gone out again. Supposedly for drinks with some colleagues, Allison had decided to stay home, catching up on work emails and mindlessly scrolling through social media. But then, as she was walking past their bedroom, something on the dresser caught her eye. Daniel's phone, left face up, screen unlocked. It was a small thing, a harmless mistake. But it was enough. Her heart skipped a beat as she saw the name that lit up the screen. Emily. She tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just a colleague, maybe it was nothing, but deep down, she knew better. She picked up the phone, her fingers trembling slightly, and unlocked the screen. The messages were brief, but clear. I miss you. I can't wait to see you again. I've been thinking about you all day. Let's make this weekend special. How about a late dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us. Allison's heart sank into her stomach. The truth hit her like a ton of bricks. She wanted to scream, to throw the phone across the room, but instead, she just stood there, frozen. She knew she had to confront him, but the question was, when and how? She tried to stay calm, trying to process everything in her mind. Daniel, the man she had married, the man she had trusted with everything, was having an affair. The betrayal cut deeper than anything she could have imagined, and it wasn't just the physical act. It was the lies, the deceit, the feeling that the man she thought she knew so well had been hiding something from her all along. She couldn't think straight. The walls in the room seemed to close in around her, the air growing thick with anger and confusion. How could this happen? How had she missed the signs? Or maybe, more to the point, how had she ignored them? She had been so wrapped up in her own life, in the demands of work and trying to keep everything together, that she had missed the cracks in their marriage, the slow unraveling of something that once seemed perfect. The next hour was a blur of pacing, replaying conversations, trying to come up with a plan. She wasn't sure what she was even waiting for. Maybe she was waiting for him to come home and explain himself, though she already knew the answer. Maybe she was hoping he would walk through the door and tell her everything, lay it all out on the table, and beg for her forgiveness. But that was not what happened. When Daniel finally came home, it was just past midnight. He entered through the back door, like he always did, dropping his keys in the bowl on the kitchen counter. He didn't notice her standing there, waiting, until he turned around and saw the expression on her face. "Hey, you're still up?" He smiled, but there was a nervousness in his voice. Allison didn't smile back. She couldn't. She just stared at him, her eyes burning with questions that she didn't know how to ask. "Who's Emily?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's face immediately paled, his body stiffening. He hesitated for a moment, like he was trying to figure out how to lie, how to spin the truth in a way that would make sense. But in that moment, there was no escaping the truth. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come out. Instead, he looked down at the floor, shame and guilt washing over him. Allison didn't need him to say anything more. The silence was enough. She felt a lump form in her throat, and for the first time in years, she felt completely alone. She wanted to shout, to accuse him of everything she had just uncovered, but somehow, she stayed quiet. She couldn't find the words. All she could do was look at him, standing there in their kitchen, the man she had shared her life with, now nothing more than a stranger. The next few moments were a blur of disbelief, hurt, and brokenness. Daniel, still avoiding her gaze, tried to explain himself, tried to tell her that it wasn't what it seemed. He said it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, but Allison couldn't listen to it. Every word felt like a slap in the face, a reminder of the trust he had shattered. It was in that moment, standing there in the kitchen, that Allison knew she had to make a choice. She could leave. She could walk away from the man who had betrayed her, or she could stay and try to make sense of it all. But no matter what she decided, everything had changed, and she wasn't sure if it was even possible to go back to the way things were. The silence in the kitchen that night felt suffocating. Daniel's eyes darted from the floor to Allison's face, but he couldn't hold her gaze for long. The weight of his actions was too much to bear, and his voice trembled as he tried to speak. I'm sorry, okay, I know I've messed up, but please, just let me explain." But how could she listen to him? How could she hear any of the explanations, the excuses, when every word felt like a further betrayal? Allison took a deep breath, fighting the anger, the hurt, and the confusion swirling inside her. "You've got to be kidding me, Daniel," she said, her voice steady but cold. "How long have you been seeing her? How long have you been lying to me?" Daniel swallowed hard, the lump in his throat making it impossible to speak for a moment. He had always been good at hiding things, at keeping up appearances. But now, standing in front of her, there was no way to keep up the act. "It started a few months ago. Okay, just a few drinks after work. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand." Allison's mind raced. "A few drinks a few months ago?" The words felt like a slap. "Daniel, you've been seeing her for months, and I never had a clue. How could you do this to me, to us?" The bitterness was thick in her throat, and she struggled to hold back the tears. She wasn't sure what hurt more, the affair itself, or the realization that she had been so blind, so willing to ignore the little things that didn't quite add up. Daniel's face was full of regret, but it didn't change anything. "I never wanted to hurt you, Allison. I swear. This wasn't about you. It was just... I don't know. It just happened. I didn't want to lose you." The words felt empty to Allison, like a hollow apology thrown out to salvage his own guilt. And yet, here we are. She could feel the walls closing in on her, the emotional weight pressing down on her chest. She wanted to leave, wanted to run away from the pain and betrayal, but she couldn't move. She just stood there, numb, trying to make sense of everything. "I don't know what you want me to say," Daniel added softly, his voice almost pleading. I've messed up, I know that. But I love you, Allison. I want to fix this. Fix this. How could anything be fixed now? She couldn't even process his words fully because everything was unraveling so quickly. She had built a life around the idea of trust and partnership, and now it felt like the foundation had been ripped out from under her. Allison turned away from him, taking a few steps toward the living room, needing space, needing to think. She didn't want to cry in front of him. Not yet. Not like this. She needed to understand what had happened, why it had happened, and what this meant for her future. "Do you love her?" she asked, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. She didn't even know why she asked. Maybe she just wanted to hear the truth, or maybe she wanted to see if there was still something left between them. Either way, the question felt like an open wound. Daniel hesitated for a long time before answering. I don't know anymore." The honesty in his response cut deep, sharper than anything else he could have said. He didn't know. He didn't know if he loved her anymore. He didn't know if he loved Allison anymore. For a moment, Allison thought she might suffocate under the weight of it all. But then, something shifted inside her. Something cracked, deep down, like the first step toward letting go. She didn't want to hold on to something that wasn't real anymore. "I need some time, Daniel," she said, her voice small but firm. "I need time to think, and I need you to leave now." There was a long pause. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't try to convince her to let him stay. Instead, he just nodded slowly, his eyes full of regret. "I'll go. I'll stay at a hotel tonight. Just don't leave me. Okay? Please." But Allison didn't respond. She couldn't. There was too much going on in her mind, too much confusion and heartbreak to say anything else. So she just stood there, watching him walk out of their house, leaving her with nothing but the deafening silence. The next few days felt like an eternity. Allison didn't know what to do, where to go, or even how to move forward. Her mind was consumed with the affair, what it meant, why it happened, and what would happen next. She spent most of her time in the house, going through the motions, pretending like everything was fine when it couldn't have been further from the truth. Daniel tried calling her, texting her, leaving messages, but Allison couldn't bring herself to respond. What was there to say? The damage was done. She needed time to process everything, to figure out who she was without him, and deep down, she knew the hardest part was yet to come, making the decision of whether or not she could ever forgive him, or if their marriage was even worth saving. In the meantime, she found herself reaching out to friends she hadn't spoken to in a while. She needed advice, support, and maybe just a distraction from the pain. Her best friend, Rachel, was the first one to pick up the phone when she called. Rachel had been there through it all. Through Allison's wedding, her career changes, and all the ups and downs that life threw her way. She knew Allison better than anyone, so when she heard the crack in Allison's voice on the phone, she knew exactly what had happened. "Tell me everything," Rachel said gently, her voice full of concern. "What's going on?" Allison spent the next hour pouring her heart out, recounting the details of the affair, the late nights, the lies, the messages, and the way it had all come crashing down. Rachel didn't interrupt, just listened, offering occasional words of comfort when needed. "I don't know what to do, Rachel," Allison said, her voice shaky. "I feel like everything I knew is gone. I don't even know who I am without him." Rachel was quiet for a moment before responding. "Allison, I know it hurts right now, but you've always been strong. You've built a life for yourself before you ever met Daniel, and you can do it again. You don't need him to define who you are." The words resonated with Allison, though they didn't ease the pain. She wasn't sure she was ready to face life without Daniel, but she knew Rachel was right. The life she had built with him wasn't the whole of her existence. It was just a part of it. As the days passed, Allison started to take small steps toward reclaiming her independence. She started going to the gym again, something she hadn't done in months. She went out with friends, something she hadn't made time for. She even started thinking about her career again, things she had put on the back burner while she focused on her marriage. But there was one thing she couldn't avoid: the constant reminder of what Daniel had done. The apartment was full of memories, little reminders of their time together, their wedding pictures, the anniversary gifts, the vacations they had taken. It all felt like a lie now. One night, after a long day of working through her emotions, Allison found herself sitting in their living room, staring at the photos on the wall. The weight of everything hit her all at once. The question she had been avoiding: should she stay, or was it time to move on for good? Before she could answer that question, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. "Allison, I can't keep doing this. Please talk to me, I miss you." Reminder to viewers: if you're enjoying this journey with Allison and want to see what happens next, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Share this video with friends who might find comfort or inspiration in Allison's story. And of course, stay tuned for more, as we dive deeper into the complexities of love, betrayal, and healing. It had been a week since Daniel's last message, and Allison had heard nothing from him since she was used to the silence by now, though it still left a bitter taste in her mouth. The house felt emptier with each passing day, and the once comforting hum of her life had been replaced with a constant, hollow echo. Even when she forced herself to focus on work, the memories of what Daniel had done crept in at the edges of her thoughts. The tension was unbearable, thick, and suffocating. But she wasn't ready to give up on herself. Not yet. She had started seeing a therapist, someone she'd reluctantly agreed to visit. Talking to someone about all the anger, pain, and confusion helped in ways she hadn't expected. It wasn't easy, but slowly, she felt like she was making progress, starting to find herself again. Still, she had that gnawing feeling inside, that question she couldn't escape. Could she ever forgive Daniel? Could she move forward with him, knowing what he had done? The phone buzzed on the table one afternoon, and she glanced at the screen. It was from Rachel. "Allison, you're not going to believe this. I saw Daniel last night. He was with her, and I don't think he's planning to come back to you." Her heart dropped into her stomach. She didn't know why, but she couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of dread that settled over her. She had suspected for days, maybe even weeks, that Daniel was still involved with the other woman, but seeing it confirmed hit her harder than she had expected. Rachel had always been her rock, and to hear this from her, of all people, felt like another betrayal. She didn't even think twice before texting Rachel back. "Where did you see them?" Rachel replied almost immediately. "At a bar on Elm Street. They were all over each other, Allison. It's done. You have to move on." Allison set the phone down, the weight of the message pressing down on her chest. It was real now. Daniel wasn't just distant, he was choosing someone else. She could feel the tears welling up, but she swallowed them down. Not now. Not in front of him. The confrontation was coming. She knew it. The next evening, Allison made up her mind. She had spent days, maybe even weeks, trying to avoid this moment, but she was done avoiding the truth. She was done letting him control the narrative. She needed answers. She needed closure. She sent Daniel a brief message. "Meet me at the old cafe. We need to talk." The message felt like a final push, like the last little thread of control she had left in this twisted situation. The cafe was quiet, small and cozy, the kind of place they used to go when they wanted to be away from the world. It felt like a world away now, a world she didn't belong to anymore. When Daniel walked in, looking disheveled and tired, Allison's heart clenched. He was still handsome in that easy, effortless way, but there was a hardness in his eyes that she hadn't seen before. It was the look of someone who knew they had lost, but wasn't ready to admit it. He sat down across from her, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't think you'd call," he said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. Allison studied him, trying to see the man she used to know. "Why, Daniel? Why did you do it?" she asked, her voice tight. She hadn't meant for it to come out like an accusation, but it was impossible to hide the hurt. "Why betray me like that?" Daniel's face softened for a moment, guilt flashing in his eyes. "I don't know, Allison, I got lost. Things between us weren't what they used to be. I didn't know how to fix it, so I—" He trailed off, his words faltering. "You got lost?" Allison repeated, incredulous. "You didn't talk to me. You didn't even try. You just did it, didn't you?" She leaned forward, the heat in her voice rising. "You've been seeing her, haven't you? For months. This wasn't a mistake, Daniel. This wasn't a slip-up. You chose this." He didn't look away. He didn't deny it. "Yeah, I did, I thought maybe she was the answer." "The answer to what?" Allison snapped. to a failing marriage, to your own insecurities. What you thought running away from me would fix everything? Daniel was silent for a moment, his eyes flickering with uncertainty. I don't know, Allison, I was scared. Things weren't perfect between us, and I didn't know what to do. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did, she replied softly, the anger in her voice giving way to a deep, aching sorrow. You hurt me, Daniel. You broke everything, and now you expect me to just accept it, to forgive you? He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Allison could see the turmoil in his eyes, the internal struggle. He was torn, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. You don't get it, do you? Allison's voice grew steady, almost numb. You've taken everything from me. My trust, my peace, my sense of who I am. And you're sitting here, asking me to forgive you. To go back to what we had, like it wasn't shattered into a million pieces. There was a long pause between them, the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud. Is it over, Allison? Daniel finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Are we done? Allison's heart felt like it was being torn in two. This was it. The decision she had been avoiding for so long. The decision that would change everything. She looked at him one last time, really looked at him, and then shook her head. I don't know, she said, her voice barely audible. I don't know anymore. She stood up abruptly, the finality of the moment hitting her like a wave. I need to go, she said, the words sounding like a closing door. Daniel reached out, but she pulled away, her eyes wet with unshed tears. She didn't look back as she walked out of the cafe, the weight of the decision still heavy on her shoulders. That night, Allison didn't sleep. She couldn't. Her mind was racing, her heart aching with the realization that her life would never be the same again. She couldn't stop thinking about Daniel, about their years together, about the love they had once shared. But now, all she felt was emptiness. He had chosen someone else, and the man she had loved was no longer the same. At dawn, she finally texted Rachel. I think it's over. I think I'm done. Rachel's response came quickly. I'm here for you, Allison, always. Allison curled up on the couch, the weight of the words sinking in. She didn't know where her life was going from here. But for the first time in weeks, she felt something like hope. A small, fragile spark that maybe, just maybe, she could rebuild herself. Reminder to viewers. If you're following Allison's journey, make sure to hit like, comment your thoughts, and share this video with others who might relate. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do so now. There's so much more to come. Allison didn't know how much longer she could keep up the facade of normalcy. It was exhausting, pretending everything was fine when, in reality, her whole world felt like it was crumbling. Daniel's betrayal still hung heavy in her heart, but as the days passed, something inside her began to shift. The therapy sessions had helped her unpack the anger and grief, but now, it was like she was learning to live in the wreckage. She couldn't erase the past, couldn't change what had happened, but she was beginning to realize that it was up to her to decide what came next. The confrontation with Daniel had left her raw, but she couldn't shake the sense that there was more to his actions than what he had admitted. It didn't add up. He'd always been the type to avoid conflict, to keep things buried, yet he had chosen to risk everything for someone else. It didn't make sense. There had to be more to the story. A few days after their conversation, Rachel called her again. She had always been the one to keep Allison grounded when things got too overwhelming. But this time, there was something different about her tone. She wasn't just calling to check in. I need to tell you something, Rachel said, her voice low, like she was trying to hide something. Allison felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What's going on? Daniel. Rachel hesitated, then said it all at once. He's been seeing someone else for longer than you think. I overheard him talking to her on the phone. He said something about not being able to leave her, but he also mentioned you. Allison's breath caught in her throat. What did he say about me? Rachel paused, and Allison could practically hear the guilt in her voice. He said he didn't want to hurt you, but that it was easier to be with someone new than to fix things with you. He said he wasn't sure he loved you anymore. The words hit Allison like a slap to the face. She didn't know how to respond, the anger rising in her chest, but at the same time, a sick feeling of defeat washed over her. How could he say something like that? After everything they'd been through, after the years they had spent building a life together. "I can't believe this," Allison muttered, more to herself than to Rachel. Her mind was reeling, the emotional walls she had been carefully constructing all week starting to crack. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't know how. I wasn't sure if I was just hearing things, but hearing him talk like that, I knew I had to say something. You deserve to know." Allison leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of Rachel's words pressing on her. It was all coming to a head now. She knew she couldn't keep avoiding the truth. If Daniel had already made up his mind, it was time for her to do the same. "Thanks for telling me, Rachel," Allison said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I need to think about this. But I think it's finally time to let go." The next few days were a blur. Allison went through the motions of her everyday life, work, meetings, errands, but her mind was never far from what Rachel had told her. Daniel's betrayal wasn't just a betrayal of their marriage. It was a betrayal of her own sense of self. She wasn't going to let him take any more from her. She'd spent too many years in the shadow of his decisions, trying to fix things that weren't hers to fix. But now, it was her turn to take control. It was late afternoon when the phone rang, and Allison recognized the number before she even looked. It was Daniel. She let it ring for a moment, trying to collect herself, then answered, her voice cool. "What do you want, Daniel?" He sounded surprised to hear her voice. "Allison, hey, I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I realize I've made a huge mistake." Allison took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "You've made a lot of mistakes, Daniel, but I don't think you're ready to admit all of them." "Look, I know I've hurt you. I've been a coward and I'm sorry," he said, his tone more earnest than she had heard in a long time. "I want to make it right. I want us to fix this." Her hands tightened around the phone, her knuckles turning white. "It's too late for that, Daniel. You've already made your choice. I'm not a backup plan." I know," he said quickly. "But I've been thinking about us, about what we had, and I don't want to lose you. Please, Allison, can we talk? Can we try again?" She closed her eyes for a moment, the raw emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "Daniel, I've been living in a lie for too long. You don't get to decide when I get to heal. You don't get to choose my pain and my forgiveness." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Please, just meet me. Let's talk face to face, I'm begging you," he said, his voice cracking slightly. The desperation in his voice almost made her waver. Almost. But then she remembered the woman he had chosen over her, the life he had built with someone else, while she had been left in the dark. "No," she said firmly, the decision finally settling in her gut. "It's over, Daniel. We're done." She didn't wait for a response. She hung up before he could say another word. The days that followed were a whirlwind. Allison didn't feel relief. She didn't feel anything except numbness. It wasn't the victory she had imagined. It wasn't the catharsis she had hoped for. Instead, it was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. A new life. As the final confrontation loomed, the tension between Allison and Daniel reached its breaking point. This was the moment that would decide everything. Would she continue to let him back in, even after everything he'd done? Or was she ready to fully close that door and walk away? And then, just when Allison thought she had made her peace, an unexpected twist, Daniel showed up at her door. Reminder to viewers. If you've been following along, you know the tension's been building to a breaking point. Hit that like button if you're as invested in Allison's journey as we are, and don't forget to share, comment, and subscribe so you can catch the next part. Things are about to get intense. Allison barely slept that night. Her mind replayed the conversation with Daniel over and over again, the sound of his voice begging her to meet him, to talk face to face. Despite her resolve, a part of her was torn. She had spent so long trying to build a life with him, trying to hold on to a future that now felt like a fragile dream. She had always believed in second chances, believed that love could conquer anything. But could she really forgive him after everything? The truth was, she had already made her decision. She didn't need to meet him. She didn't need another round of promises he'd break. But when the doorbell rang that afternoon, her heart nearly stopped. She knew who it was. No one else would show up uninvited, especially not when she had made it clear, so clear, that she was done. Standing in the doorway was Daniel, looking as disheveled as she had ever seen him, his usual composed appearance gone. His eyes were bloodshot, and there was a frantic energy in the way he stood there, as if he couldn't breathe without her. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, his voice strained. Allison stared at him for a long moment. The anger that had been simmering for weeks threatened to spill over, but there was something else too, a flicker of sadness and confusion. Why was he here? What was he hoping to achieve by showing up now? Did he think that after everything, she would just welcome him back with open arms? "No," she finally said, her voice colder than she had intended. "I think I've made it pretty clear that I don't want anything to do with you anymore." Daniel's face fell, but he didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand hovering over the door as though he was afraid it might slam in his face. "I'm sorry, Allison. I know I messed up, but please, don't shut me out completely." Her breath caught in her throat. Was he really doing this now? Was he seriously asking for her forgiveness after everything? "You don't get it, Daniel," she said, her voice shaking with emotion she couldn't quite suppress. "You don't get to come here and act like everything is fine. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and you've been doing it for months, while I was out there, trusting you, loving you. Please." His voice was pleading, almost desperate now. "I made a mistake. A huge mistake, but I want to fix it. I want us to work." Allison shook her head, her mind racing as she fought to keep her emotions in check. She had spent so much time letting him back in, forgiving him again and again, but this time was different. She wasn't the same person she had been when they first met. She had changed, and so had their relationship. "Daniel," she said softly, though the words felt like a heavy weight in her chest. "I can't do this anymore. I can't keep pretending like you're not the one who broke us. You're not the same person I fell in love with." His eyes softened with something that almost resembled regret, but it wasn't enough. Nothing he could say now would erase what had been done. "I didn't want to lose you," he said, his voice cracking. "I never wanted to hurt you. But I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to undo what I've done." Her heart twisted. This wasn't easy for her either. But she had come to a realization. He couldn't fix this. Not now. Not after everything. "You already made your choice, Daniel," she said, her voice firm despite the pain gnawing at her insides. "You chose her, and now you have to live with that." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, regret and grief. Finally, he looked down, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry." Allison gave him one last, long look before stepping back. "Goodbye, Daniel." The door closed with a finality that seemed to echo through the empty house. She didn't feel a sense of relief. Not yet, but she knew she had made the right decision. For once, it was about her happiness, her future, not about him. The next few days were a blur. Allison threw herself into work, into the routines that had kept her grounded before everything had gone south. But there was a constant heaviness in her chest, an ache that wouldn't go away. She had made a choice, but it didn't feel like a victory. Rachel called her again, sensing her friend's unease. "Are you okay?" Rachel asked, her voice full of concern. "I don't know," Allison admitted. "I think I did the right thing. But it still hurts. It hurts so much." "I know, hon," Rachel said softly. "It's going to take time, but you're strong. You'll get through this. You've always been stronger than you think." Allison sighed, leaning against the window as she stared out at the gray sky. "I don't know. I feel like I'm losing part of myself. I've spent so much time trying to hold everything together, and now, it feels like I don't know who I am anymore." "You'll figure it out," Rachel reassured her. "You're not alone in this." That night, Allison took a walk through the neighborhood, trying to clear her head. The streets were quiet, the city lights casting long shadows on the sidewalk. She thought about everything. About Daniel, about their life together, about the future that she had once imagined for herself. She had given everything to that relationship, and now she had to figure out how to rebuild herself from the wreckage. The following week, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived, one that would change everything. The envelope was addressed in a familiar handwriting. It was from Daniel. She hesitated before opening it, her fingers trembling. She had already said goodbye to him. She didn't need to read anything more from him, but she tore open the envelope anyway, curiosity getting the better of her. The letter was short. There was no apology, no pleas for forgiveness. But there was one line that stopped her cold. "I made a mistake, and I'm not sure how to fix it, but I want you to know, I never stopped loving you." Reminder to viewers. Things are heating up in a major way. What will Allison do with this shocking revelation from Daniel? Will she open her heart to him again? Or is it finally over for good? Don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your thoughts mean everything to us. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button to stay updated on the next part of this intense journey. After reading Daniel's letter, Allison sat in silence for what felt like hours. The words on the page were simple, but they carried so much weight. He admitted his mistakes. He acknowledged the pain he caused, and he still said that he loved her. But that wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. For so long, she had clung to the idea of them, of the life they could have, if only things had been different. But now, she realized that holding on to the past was only keeping her from moving forward. She had to let go of that dream, because it was just that. A dream. And dreams couldn't heal the wounds he had inflicted. Allison folded the letter and placed it in the drawer where she had kept so many other reminders of their life together. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't sad, either. She had simply accepted that their time had passed, and now she had to focus on the future, her future. The next day, she called Rachel. "I'm done," Allison said, her voice steady but resolute. "I'm not going to hold on to him anymore. I'm done with all of it." Rachel, though silent for a moment, finally spoke. "I think that's the best decision, Allie. You've done enough. It's time for you to take care of yourself now." And just like that, Allison felt a small weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't an immediate sense of freedom. There was still a lot of work to do in healing. But it was a start. Over the next few weeks, Allison focused on herself. She spent more time with friends, reconnected with old hobbies, and even started volunteering at a local shelter. She had always wanted to give back, but she had never made the time. Now, with her heart slowly healing, she realized that there was more to life than the pain she had endured. At work, Allison found herself becoming more confident. She started taking on bigger projects, stepping into roles that she had always hesitated to try. Her colleagues noticed the shift in her. They could see that she was more assertive, more present, and they admired her for it. But it wasn't just at work where she saw change. Her relationships with her friends deepened. She spent more time with Rachel, laughing and sharing her thoughts without holding anything back. She also reconnected with her family, something that had fallen by the wayside during her turbulent time with Daniel. And slowly but surely, Allison began to realize that there was life beyond the pain. She didn't need Daniel to feel whole. She was enough, just as she was. One Saturday afternoon, as the sun set and the streets of the city filled with the warm glow of evening, Allison decided to take a walk to the park. It had become her new ritual, taking some quiet time for herself to reflect, breathe, and just be. She sat on a bench, watching the families and couples go by, and felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't sad. She was content. And then, unexpectedly, her phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel. "I know I messed up. I just wanted you to know that you'll always have a special place in my heart." Allison stared at the message for a long time, feeling the weight of it, but this time, it didn't hurt. It didn't stir up the painful memories or ignite the anger she had once felt. Instead, she simply put her phone down and took a deep breath. It's over. And for the first time in a long time, Allison smiled. A few months later, Daniel moved out of the city. Allison had heard from mutual friends that he was trying to move on, to rebuild his life. She didn't know where he was going or what he was doing, and she didn't need to know. She had let go of that part of her life. As for Allison, she was ready to move forward, to build a new life without the baggage of the past weighing her down. She had learned so much about herself over the past few months. She had learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and that sometimes, walking away was the only way to preserve your own peace. She had learned that it was okay to choose herself. And now, Allison was looking forward to whatever the future might hold. She wasn't sure what that looked like yet, but she knew one thing for certain. She was going to face it head on. Allison stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the hem of her new dress. It was for her first solo dinner date, a way of celebrating the new chapter in her life. She had grown so much, and while the scars of the past were still there, they didn't define her anymore. The doorbell rang. She checked the clock. It was time. As she walked to the door, she smiled, thinking about all the lessons she had learned, and as she opened it, she was greeted by a new world. A world full of opportunities, self-love, and the promise of happiness on her terms. And there you have it. The end of Allison's journey. She faced heartbreak, betrayal, and loss. But in the end, she came out stronger. Her story is a reminder that we all have the power to overcome even the hardest of times, and that true healing comes from within. What do you think of Allison's journey? How would you handle a situation like hers? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more. I've got plenty more stories coming your way, and I can't wait to share them with you. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.